Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Aarons, and today we're going to look at the broad subject of repeated themes and what to do with them. And though this topic has been covered by me in the past, I wanted to look at the issue from a more detailed perspective. When themes occur and recur in a piece, in many cases they're written in a different key or register, perhaps with changes to the accompaniment or added ornaments in the melody, and therefore we don't have to explicitly alter much of our interpretation in order to make the reappearance of the theme sound different. In other words, the composer does that job for us, and we merely have to make some general changes in our approach, such as playing the theme a little louder or softer, or changing our tempo, or our use of rubato. But what do we do when a theme is repeated in the same register without much variation or change in either the melody or the accompaniment? Do we try to play each appearance of the theme differently, and if so, what parameters help us to choose what precisely to change? An even more problematic possibility comes to mind. Are we in fact changing the way we play the theme when it repeats just to play it differently, making the assumption that the audience would get bored by hearing the theme once again? Let's have a look at a piece which, in my eyes, exemplifies precisely this kind of problem. Chopin's Fourth Ballade is a wonderful piece of music, but when I first learned it many years ago, I was very concerned about the main first section of the piece and how to go about playing it. The main theme as a whole is repeated 3 times in the piece, and each repetition is slightly different from the first statement of the theme. Here's the theme as we first hear it. Now, we have the second statement with very small differences. The first time, for instance, the left hand does this. Whereas the second time, the left hand does this. Similarly, in the right hand, we have one minor change. The first time we have the right hand, it repeats the same phrase or idea twice, identically. Whereas the second time, he adds in a little ornamentation. And so on and so forth. And he does this again when the theme appears higher. Aside from these small kinds of variations, the theme itself stays the same. The third statement of the theme has some added voices in the right hand, creating a rather dense contrapuntal texture. Last time the theme appears, we're given something entirely out of the ordinary, an almost impromptu or fantasy-like distribution, where the left hand is moving not in chords, but in arpeggios, and the right hand is filled in with classic Chopin ornamentation. The third and fourth appearances of the theme are obviously different enough in terms of their texture and character that when we're playing them, we don't really need to make a conscious effort to make them sound different to an audience. So, for the purposes of this discussion, we can ignore them for now. However, the first and second statements are nearly identical. To make matters worse, the theme itself is constructed of smaller, repeated gestures, which, if not graded properly, will make a listener believe that they've heard this all a million times before. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The theme has two identical bits. Plus one ending, or transitional bit. Then it's repeated a little higher, again with two identical bits, plus one ending, or transitional. Then the ending, or transition, is repeated a little lower. Bringing us to the final appearance of the two identical bits plus one ending. This means that in the main theme, we hear this gesture 6 times, and this one 4 times. It's reasonable to say, well, Andrew, the accompaniment makes a difference, and the location of the thematic bits help to characterize these to sound all different. We don't have to worry about them much, in other words. I'd completely agree if this theme in its entirety was only presented to us once before the variations began. But because we have to play the entire theme twice, we have to make a few more decisions in our interpretation so that there's never a dull moment. Remember, we're telling a story, and stories should not stagnate in repeated themes, unless, of course, that is the composer's specific intent, but that doesn't happen very much in earlier music. Here's the point where a student would, naturally, ask a pianist. Andrew, what am I supposed to do with this? First, when you have a theme that is repeated nearly identically, you have to look for the places where the composer has altered the theme. In this case, in left hand, it only happens once. That's the first time, and the second time. In the right hand, we have one change that happens twice. And then the second time we have this. And again this. Does this mean that we can make a big deal of these differences? Well, we can, but within reason. That means that we can play them perhaps a little louder, or perhaps with more emphasis. As an example, the first time we have this, maybe the second time we can play it a little louder. Similarly, with the left hand, maybe the first we can do a little more, and maybe the second time we can do a little less. So, first time. Maybe the second time, maybe a little less. We can't go all out in terms of adding copious amounts of rubato or added dynamic like this. In my opinion, has to be subtle, but still audible. Next, does Chopin give us any indication on how to play the themes differently? In other words, does he mark one theme with, say, forte, and another, and the next time it comes around, piano? Are there changes to the tempi or articulation that we can bring out? In this specific case, the answer is no. We're left on our own devices, and we have to rely upon our creativity in order to come up with a way to make a theme sound familiar and yet sound different enough to be interesting. This is where the real challenge begins. Let's have a look at the structure for a moment from the perspective of an audience. The first time the theme is played, we as an audience are encountering it for the first time, obviously. Because this is a first impression, we don't have to manipulate the theme much in order to make it sound interesting. The theme merely existing creates and sustains the interest level. However, the second time the audience hears this theme, they have a recollection in their memory which allows them to compare the first statement of the theme directly with the second one they're currently hearing. If the second statement is played in exactly the same manner, the audience will eventually recognize the similarity and stop paying attention because their minds can predict what will happen next, even with the small differences that Chopin wrote into the score. So we must make a difference in some way, both on the general level and on a more detailed level. And fortunately, there are enough structural clues which can help us to determine precisely what to do. Let's consider where the second statement of the theme occurs, specifically what it is in between. The first statement is like an introduction, and we've looked at this before. But what happens after the second statement of this theme? Well, we have a transition to a different theme and character. This is crucial to know, because it means that the second statement must either help to prepare and transition to this new theme, or to serve as a direct contradiction to it. In other words, the second statement can either take some elements of the character of the upcoming section, thus preparing the listeners for it, or it can try to be as opposite to the new section as possible, thus making the new section something of a surprise. Here's what I mean practically. The new section is rather soft and temporarily undefined, as if we were swimming in resonance. So, if I want to prepare an audience for this, then the second time the main theme appears, I can play it a little softer than the first, and perhaps with a little more freedom in terms of rhythm. Instead of it being defined like this, I might play it a little bit like this. Or, if I want the second statement to be a direct contradiction, then I can play it with more metric regularity and louder. Then the second theme comes as something of a surprise. Compare this. With the character of this. This kind of decision affects the general interpretation of the second statement of the main theme, and gives us a character or atmosphere to play around in. But this is not the end of it. Now, we must consider on the micro level if we want to make any interpretational changes to the actual theme itself. But this will be discussed in detail in part 2 of this topic. There's so much to talk about, but hopefully this video can give you some ideas to play around with when you're facing themes that repeat themselves. Always look for creative ways to play repeated sections so that they don't sound identical, and never stop experimenting with possibilities of sound production, tempi, and of course dynamics and articulation. There's so much more to come, but until then, keep practicing, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.